How do you decide where to invest? It's a difficult question for real estate investors. Sometimes you have to decide, the place that I live now is too expensive, so where am I going to invest? And this is Rich Carey from the Rich on Money podcast, and this is episode 22. And it should seem obvious that the place where you live now is usually the best idea. But if it's not going to be now, how would you decide where in this country to invest? And I'm going to give you a framework for that. And I'm going to list in order how you should approach this question. But let me quickly give you the answer to this. How do you decide where? Number one, you should invest where you are now. That's the most ideal. Number two is where you've lived before. Number three is where you have someone you trust. I call them a trusted confidant. Number four, you should invest in a place where you could end up living in the future. And number five, invest in some random ass place you have no connection to. Not ideal, but still possible. But there is an art and a science to picking the right place to invest if it's not going to be where you live now. Now, there are obvious reasons why the place that you live now is the best, and we'll talk about them quickly. Obvious reasons is you have connections. It's not just a question of being close to it, being able to drive to the property, being able to handle emergencies yourself, being able to go to the property on short notice, to go look at something, go check that the work was done correctly. Somebody's locked out of the house, go let them in. Proximity is an obvious reason. Big one is for turnover. Being there in person is a very, very big deal. And that's something that you need. For turnover, you really need either you or somebody you trust to be there. Another important thing is you will know people. You'll get to know other investors. Maybe you know people in your neighborhood, people at church, people at your children's school, people in the community, maybe people that are in government. But through these contacts, you may end up buying properties, finding deals other than what's on the MLS. These are things that are very difficult to do when you don't live in a place and you're simply just investing by talking to a realtor and going through the MLS. That's a downside. You're buying the house for more money. So what is hard about being separated from your rental properties? And I can talk about this because I was separated from mine most of my career. I was in the military. I'd buy and then I'd move away. And that pretty much characterizes my investing from 2003 until 2019 when I came back to Montgomery, Alabama, and took over managing my 20 rental properties and continued to add more. So I can tell you what's hard about not being there to manage your property. And the main thing is this: I really feel like that with the right coaching, with the right training, with the right help, by watching the right guys' videos, you could easily do it yourself. You could easily manage properties from afar, even without a property manager. But here's the parts that are tricky. The real tricky thing is, number one, turnover. When somebody moves out, go in and inspect the place, decide what needs to be fixed, decide if you're going to do any upgrades, repairs, or just get it ready to rent again. And then having that work supervised, done, getting somebody in, inspection, all that kind of stuff. That whole process is really hard to do with someone you don't know or trust. Of course, if you're there in person, you can do it. And other than that, I'd say maybe dealing with emergencies. House catches on fire, somebody gets hurt badly, house is flooding. Maybe situations where getting there quickly will be helpful. It helps to be in person. Other than that, all the other things, like I would say, that's the other 95% of the time you own the property. You just don't need to be there. It could easily be in another state. It could be in another country. I mean, if you know what you're doing, you're going to manage it just fine. I've managed between 20 and 30 something properties myself over the last 7 or 8 years, and it really hasn't been that much work. It really is the turnovers. And if you're good at real estate, turnover shouldn't be that often because your tenants are happy and they stay, and because you don't have to evict people because you picked the right ones in the first place. Listen to Rich Carey, Rich on Money, listen to my podcasts, watch all my channels, and you won't have these problems. Smooth sailing. You won't have that many turnovers. Here are the issues that affect why you might not invest where you live now. The number one is affordability. Maybe you're in Northern California, San Francisco, Southern California, LA. You're in the Navy, to my military buddies. San Diego, if you're in the Navy. DC, if you're in the military. Anytime you're in Pearl Harbor or Hickam, you're in Hawaii. My God, don't try to invest there because it's high cost of living. Affordability can really matter. One way to gauge affordability for rental properties is to know the 1% rule and the 50% rule. The 1% rule states if you buy a property and fix it up and get it ready to rent, it should rent for 1% of the purchase price. So if you are in Hawaii and you buy a rental property for $1.1 million, it should rent for $11,000. That would be 1% of $1.1 million, $11,000 a month. Well, guess what? They don't rent for that much when you buy them for 1.1 million. They rent for probably less than half that, or maybe half that. They don't make good rentals. Conversely, here in Montgomery, Alabama, you could buy a house for $150,000 and you can rent it out for $1,500. That passes the 1% rule. Another rule I like to mention for affordability is the 50% rule. If your rent coming in, let's say that you're in Washington, D.C. and your rent's $4,000 a month, what are your expenses on that property? Assuming the house isn't brand new, maybe it's whatever, 20, 30, 40 years old. Your expenses should be about 50% of your rent. You probably didn't realize that, but all these different things add up. Now that 50%, 10% of that could be going to property management, but then there's another 40% that's a bunch of other things, expenses, maintenance, something called capital expenditures, fees, Murphy's Law. It adds up. Again, I've been a landlord for over 20 years. I've found the 50% rule to be fairly accurate. If you take away property management, it's 40%, and it's not going to be a lot less than 40%. So dream on if you think there are hardly any expenses when you rent on a property. There's a lot. Yes, you get to write them off, so that's awesome. Things that affect affordability, things that affect whether or not the 1% rule is going to apply in your city. Because in your city, there are still different areas you can invest in. I can talk about Montgomery, Alabama. The neighborhood that my family was in would not make a good rental property because of the reasons I'm about to talk about, because it's a gated community, because it's a newer home, because of low crimes. Price to rent ratio is bad, doesn't come close to the 1% rule. But 5 miles away in a different neighborhood is where I could buy properties for maybe $150,000 and rent for $1,500 a month. Okay, same city, but there's different affordability depending on the quality of the house and the neighborhood. What kind of things make it very hard for a property to fit the 1% rule? Because I hear a lot of complaining about the 1% rule. Oh, the 1% rule. Oh, it doesn't apply anymore. Oh, it's outdated. It doesn't make any sense to say the 1% rule is outdated because it's just math. All you're doing is comparing the price of the house to what it can rent for. And that's just a ratio. And that's where 1% comes from. And if it's much lower than that, by sheer force of numbers, you just wouldn't be making any money on it or making very little, not enough to make sense. So if you think the 1% rule doesn't apply, or if it's impossible, then don't invest because you're not going to make money. Rant over. Things that affect whether the 1% rule is even achievable. One is you're in a high cost of living area, like in general, Honolulu, Washington, D.C., San Diego, Anaheim, San Francisco, New York City. Very hard just because they're very high cost of living areas. And maybe you can go out to these rougher neighborhoods and maybe make it work. But most of the time, just living there is a big problem. You're not going to be able to invest there. Southern California, you're going to pay $900,000 for a property that's going to rent for $4,000 a month. You're not making any money. You're losing money on that property. And 10 or 20 years from now, even with appreciation, you might still not be making money on this. There's the good community effect. I kind of talked about that already. Here in Montgomery, Alabama, I was in a good community. I'll also throw in the gated community effect. In situations like that, where it's just desirable because of many different factors, newer houses, gated community, low crime, near some really nice shopping, all of these things tend to lend themselves to houses not working as rental properties. Now let's get into something called a trusted confidant. I call it the hierarchy of boots on the ground, but basically you need to have boots on the ground in the place that you invest. And the best kind of boots on the ground are the ones that you wear. But let's talk about if you're not going to be there. What is the best kind of boots on the ground to have in the place that you're going to invest? Because what you need for a rental property, and it had a lot to do with turnovers. Who's going to do those turnovers if you're not there? Yeah, maybe a property manager, but lots of property managers aren't necessarily good at turnovers. They're good at everything else, but turnovers are where things can fall apart sometimes. Getting it rented out again, deciding what kind of maintenance to do, supervising the work, not getting charged too much for it. That's all very difficult. Yeah, some property managers are going to do okay, but I don't love them. I'm going to say this because there are property managers that I love. A good property manager is worth his or her weight in gold. They're tough to find. Different video for that. You need two things in the place you're going to invest, a trusted confidant and a place that you have connections. Those would be the two most ideal things. So a trusted confidant, it's just like a friend or a family member that you know will act in your best interest, that you know won't rip you off, that you know you can depend on, that you know can have a tough conversation with a tenant and not be a pushover in person if some crazy situation came up. A person who is dependable and reliable, that can go over to the property and take pictures of it and help you make decisions about what should be fixed. That's what's hard, is you need that in the location that you invest. The other thing that's cool to have, and this affects the hierarchy, which locations are better than others, it's great to have connections in a place. What I mean by connections, like talked about this earlier, because you have people that you know that are like mayor or work for the mayor or councilman, councilwoman, state government, local government, elected officials of some kind, people at church, people at school, people at work. You have a network of people in this city that can help you do a lot of things, like find properties to buy, find good people to fix things, help you in emergencies, make things happen fast. Number one, place you are now, you've got everything there. You've got yourself, you've got the connections, and you've even got trusted confidants. Place you are now is at top of the list, and that's what you want to do, unless for various reasons it just isn't affordable. You have to drive out really, really, really far to be affordable, or places that are affordable, the crime's too bad, or landlord-tenant laws, it's not landlord-friendly. I'm thinking New York City, Seattle, California, to name a few. You don't want to invest in these places, not landlord-friendly. So if you can't be the place where you live now, you go to number two, a place where you lived before. Why do I like where you lived before as number two? I've already said this, but the reason why I like this is you have two things. You're not there, but you have your connections from before. Various people, not necessarily people you trust implicitly, but a lot of people you know and have connections with and can call on to help. And then number three, you actually have that trusted confidant, that friend or family member that you can depend on, that can help you deal with emergencies, help you deal with turnover, go to the property when necessary. Whether or not you use a property manager, it's great to have a trusted confidant in that place that can back things up, that can make sure that things are going okay with a property manager, that can allow you to try to manage this property yourself by having that trusted confidant there. You can do this with a trusted confidant, and it's something that I've done and something that I've seen many other people do. I don't mind investing in a place that has a trusted family member or friend. Sometimes your mom, your brother, your cousin is a family member, but they're not a trusted confidant. They're bozos. They're unreliable. They're not trustworthy. They'd probably make things worse for you. They make bad decisions. They won't show up when you need them. So trusted confidant, a family member or a friend that you implicitly trust. You really trust a lot. Number four is an interesting one because it's still better than going to a place where you have no connections, no friends, no family. You've never been before. This one's better. It's a place that you haven't lived yet, but you're planning on living in the future, or you hope to live in the future. Maybe the place that you're going to have a forever home, or the place you hope to retire, or the place that you believe you're going next. Why? Because sometimes when you have a rental property, it's necessary to travel to that place to handle certain situations. That could be expensive if it happens a lot, but if it happens every 3 to 5 years, you just travel there for turnover. I have a friend who's in several different places, Hawaii, Texas, and I think like Rhode Island, and he travels for those turnovers, and it works for him. But number four is a place that you plan to live in the future and that you wouldn't mind traveling to because you're going to live there in the future, because you're going to put roots down there. So you could start building connections. You could make contact with people and start building people that could become trusted confidants, but you have a reason to travel there. It makes sense to travel there because you have an interest in that place. I'm going to buy a forever home here, whatever the situation is. I'm going to move here next. I'm going to move back to where my family, I'm going to move back to where so-and-so lives. And then number five is a tough one, a brand new place that you have no connections and no trusted confidant. Yes, it can be done. Yes, you could determine through research that this is the best city, like maybe Montgomery, Alabama. Maybe you hear about what I'm doing here and the prices that I'm getting, and the fact that it's not overhyped, it's not overfished by other investors. You're like, damn it, I'm going to invest there. Now, of course, I'm sort of a trusted confidant, but you don't know me well yet. But you can do it. You can pick a location you've never been before. Listen to my podcast. Get in there and go for it. Buy a rental property, make it happen. It's totally doable. And that's how you decide where to buy a rental property. Hierarchy of boots on the ground. I love this. Make great decisions. Understand what's important about deciding where to invest in the world, probably in the United States. Leave me a comment. Would you change the order of any of these? This is Rich Carey from the Rich on Money podcast, signing off.